Okay guys, I've got a little bit of a treat for you today. So, I was talking to Rady again, big shout out to him. We talk a lot about familiars, and honestly, if you play a lot of Esper familiars, please hit me up. Please talk to me about it. I love talking to people about the deck. I would love to hear whatever input you have. I think it's very helpful. But anyway, so we were talking, and it suddenly occurred to me that maybe I could just try, like basically we were talking about playing Godfair's Faithful, and then I was like, or no, we were talking about Scarscale Ritual actually, and I was like, wait, what if you just, I think we were talking about both of them, and I was like, wait, what if you just put a bunch of Godfair's Faithfuls in your main deck, played a bunch of Scarscale Rituals, and actually cut all of the black cards from the main deck. As you can see, the only black cards, or the only black things in the main deck are these two Dimir Aqueducts. And in the sideboard we've got two Prisms and a Reaping to board in when the Faithfuls are bad. You can, against some sort of grindy deck, you can bring in this 4 cards, bring out the 4 Faithfuls, and kind of be nicely set up for a grindy matchup. But in any case, I just 5-0'd with this deck, spoiler alert, and I think I'd like to watch some replays with you guys. So unfortunately, our first match opponent actually just immediately conceded. I'm not quite sure what that was about. So I really just 4-0'd. Like completely reasonably, I just 4-0'd. But in any case, let's watch the first match here, which is actually the second match, of course. So I'll hit play, and alright, so the opponent plays a Terrarion turn 1. So at this point I'm kind of thinking that they're eggs, but that's also extremely optimistic. They're almost, like, they're very likely not playing eggs. But, so we got, you know, a nice little hand here. We have land, bounce, land, preordain, and then we draw into the Tranquil Cove, I think. And we have, like, Preordain on turn 2 into a Lifeland plus a Godfair's Faithful and another Preordain. And this is a pretty good start. Our opponent's also missing land drops, so this game is basically an auto win. This game is like kind of a free win because our opponent just didn't really do anything. We also have like a million Sea Gates. Opponent just keeps missing land drops. This is like horribly unlucky for our opponent. And yeah, basically about the extent of what's happening here. And so we're just gonna play Seagate here. And we are lucky enough to actually draw a familiar off that Seagate. Play it this turn. Pretty strong line. Okay, now the opponent starts getting stuff started. They cast a couple Thought Casts, Frogmite, a Galvanic Blast on our familiar. And so now we get a little bit of insight into their deck. I'm going to pause the video at this point, and I think that they're playing the sort of affinity list that cuts Carapace Forgers for just, I think, more card draw, like maybe Perilous Research, which is part of the reason that they, I think, play Terrarion in the first place, is because they're playing Perilous Research in order to draw more cards. They're playing, I think, the full 4 copies of Gearseeker Serpent, if I remember correctly the list. And I think they might have a couple more flings than is usual. I'm not quite sure. But in any case, this game is just about over. I'm going to Mnemonic Wall. This was actually a misclick. I meant to play Muldrifter here, but I accidentally clicked on Mnemonic Wall. And then I preordain and find Familiar. But it really doesn't matter at this point. I'd probably keep the land too if I had to guess. This game's like very close to over. So yeah, we keep the land, play the second familiar, and then here we can just, or the first familiar actually, our familiar last time died. And then we can just play Muldrifter, draw a bunch of cards. And then at this point, I mean, well, our opponent has like some beatdowns, but we have like just far too many blockers, and we've gained a bunch of life, and we're going to continue to gain life as long as our Godfair's Faithful sits here, which is part of the reason I like this card a lot in the main deck is not only is it just a very nice blocker, it just is a proactive like threat almost, because you play that on turn 1 or turn 2, and then every blue spell you cast for the rest of the game is just going to make it harder and harder for your opponent to kill you in a reasonable time frame. And if you can buy enough time with this deck, I think like the more time you buy with this deck, the more immensely you are favored, because this deck really does have one of the most powerful late games in the Pauper format. So yeah, the opponent's actually playing a very interesting deck. They have Rusted Relic. I've never seen this card played in Affinity decks before. But I mean, it's certainly powerful. It's a 4-mana 5/5 essentially. And they of course have a bunch of Mirror Enforcers and an ATOG. And at this point, we're able to assemble a combo of Prosperous Pirates, Mnemonic Wall, Familiar, and Sage's Row. This lets us play flickers, mana neutral flickers. We can flicker the Mnemonic Wall and the Prosperous Pirates. We do not gain or lose mana in that exchange, and we're able to mill them 4 cards every time. So yeah, that's game 1, and we will go ahead and open up the replay for game 2 right now. Let's see what's good. So this hand I kept. We only have 2 lands. We're on the draw, but the Familiar is kind of a land, because if the Familiar doesn't die, it lets us play the Seagate on turn 4, which is, it's still pretty bad. It's not good, don't get me wrong. The God of Pharaoh's Faithful is a solid draw here, but I think this hand is still a reasonable keep, because you do have, like when you play this deck, you have to recognize the potential to draw a bounce land, and I think that potential sort of lets you, it gives you a bit of leeway, because like if you can hit your first 2 land drops, even if you're not like guaranteed to hit a 3rd land drop, just the extra draw at a bounce land, which is essentially 2 lands, is extremely powerful. As you can see, we even missed a turn here, but still drew the bounce land afterwards. And I would argue that this is not a bad position at all. We just get to play the bounce land, have 2 lands, nicely set up for the next turn. Wow, we even are fortunate enough to draw another bounce land. So I think here I might, okay, I take like a Faithful and play the Faithful for sure, and then I play the bounce land. But I think in that situation, if I did not hit the Faithful, I probably would have cycled to step and then just bounced a Cove to my hand. So the opponent, we find out, is playing Disciple of the Vault at this point, and they've got Frogmites, they've got Mirror Enforcers, you know. So we don't really have to block this. We can go down to 7, and we're kind of going nuts at this point. We get to play Seagate. It's hard for them to keep getting through damage. Wow, a Snap is super good here. We just get to basically stifle their whole offense while developing our own defense and offense at the same time. That's basically the main reason why I love this deck so much, is because while you're developing your defensive situation, deploying blockers like this Mole Drifter, these Seagates, you're also developing your offense. Like Sunscape Familiar is such a good card because it's an 0/3 that plays defense, while also making the rest of your defensive blue cards cheaper, and then it can also contribute to the combo, which is obviously your offense, your end game offense, which, I mean, sometimes the end of the game comes on turn 4 or turn 5, which is like, that's not, other decks aren't reaching their end game by turn 4 or turn 5. I mean, sure, Stompy does, but we can interact with enough with Stompy through like blockers and snaps that I think that Stompy is like, they have a hard time racing us, which is like, I mean, Stompy's the racing deck. I think this deck has a lot to offer in terms of just like, if you don't interact with it, it'll kill you. So now here, we of course have the combo. We have 2 Fams out, the Sage's Row, the Mnemonic Wall, the Flicker. We can just flicker land Mnemonic Wall every single time. It's mana neutral, and we get to mill the opponent. So here, in this match, we actually use 2 mana neutral combos. Kind of showcasing the power of Sage's Row Denizen. Without Sage's Row Denizen, neither of these kills would be possible. We'd have to wait more time before we were able to kill the opponent. This is part of the reason that I actually like Sage's Row Denizen a lot. I stopped playing it for a long time, a few years actually. Like, I remember when I started playing Familiars, I had Sage's Row in the main deck, of course. But as I grew to love the deck a little bit more, I cut it for Capsize. Thinking that, well, Sage's Row, it's just a 2/3 for 3, right? Like, how good is that? Capsize is better. It can bounce, you know, a journey. It can interact with the opponent. You can randomly take out a bounce land and win the game. But now that I've matured a bit, now that I've grown older, I realized that these mana neutral combos with Sage's Row, they actually mean quite a lot. Like, they give you a lot of free wins that you just wouldn't be able to get otherwise. So I do recommend playing Sage's Row, even perhaps in paper. Though, honestly, in paper, I would probably not play any win condition. I would probably play Hidden Strings and plan to tap out my opponent on my combo turn. Like, if you go off, basically, the only reason why you can't compulsive research infinitely a blue deck is because if they have mana up, they can draw it into a counter spell. I guess actually that doesn't matter, never mind. Because you could just get back like all the flickers and all the snaps in your deck before ever giving them any cards. And then every time they can only cast like 1 or 2 counter spells, right? It's not like they have infinite mana. And then of course you can just play snaps, place flickers to like essentially counter their counter spells. So I guess that's actually a moot point that I was making there. But in any case, I do like Sage's Row Denizen. It does it's definitely a concession to the Moto clocks. Don't get me wrong. I think I would play no kill cons in real life. But I think that Sage's Row Denizen is I think it's better than Dinroba Horror in that it just gives you wins that Dinroba Horror does not. Like, sure, Dinroba Horror, I could like bounce his land, bounce his creature, buy more time. But Sage's Row just wins the game here, and I think that's worth a lot. Like, it actually gives you kills from positions that are not otherwise kills. Which is like, that's a reason to play the card in paper. Like, you can win the game with Sage's Row, Mnemonic Wall, Pirates, and a Familiar. So, I don't know. I've actually grown quite fond of Sage's Row here. But in any case, we'll be back for another match after this.